With ZenlessZoneZero's release of Burnice, there are probably plenty of you who have pulled for her, but equally as many that likely aren't super familiar with some of the tricks and tips that I'm going to be mentioning in today's video. To be clear, Burnice is not that difficult of a character, right? Except for the fact that there are a few things that you may or may not need to optimize if you want to maximize your damage and if you want to, well, one-shot everyone on screen. Without further ado, let's take a look at the 5 things you may have missed about Burnice that you could use to make her way better. Let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about when it comes to Burnice is the fact that you can use her double flamethrower after using her charged basic, performing a defensive assist follow-up, or using a chain attack. Now, if this was the end of the tip, you would be right in assuming, well, this is pretty surface level, Connor. This is about all you need to know. However, what I'm here to tell you today is that actually using the double flamethrower immediately following a defensive follow-up, a charged basic attack, or even a chain attack might not actually be worth it. Now, of course, in a lot of situations, using the flamethrower is nice because you're able to reapply or apply scorched marks to enemies, but also this does end up consuming a lot of energy or may actually run you out of heat. Now, this specific tip is targeted to her charged basic attack for that exact reason. With her charged basic attack, if you use her spinning move, she does apply scorch marks to the enemies around her. However, this does consume her resource bar, which may not be worth it in the long run, since you'll just end up with an even shorter afterburner period or an even shorter nitro cocktail fuel state. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is actually related to her build and a W engine choice she has. This is something that a lot of you guys have been asking about, and it's specifically regarding Grace's W engine. Now, for a lot of anomaly agents, Grace's W engine is actually a point in contention. There are some characters that can use it sometimes, there's other characters that don't even want to bother with it and would rather use something like Electro Lip Gloss or Rainforest Gourmet. But I'm here to tell you with Grace specifically, Fusion Compiler, aka Grace's W engine, is actually quite good. Now, to be clear, it isn't as good as something like an R5 Electro Lip Gloss, but no one at this point is able to get a rank 5 version of it, so let's take that into consideration when thinking about this W engine. Now, the thing about this W engine is that its performance is definitely dependent on how flashy or how many optimizations you're willing to do, specifically with this W engine. For Fusion Compiler specifically, having the attack percent is nice, of course, but Burnice has a lot of different ways to get attack already, and although the additional anomaly proficiency that you get stacks up to 3 times, the thing that normally holds this W engine being good on other anomaly agents is really how frequently you can stack up this effect. With an agent like Grace, the effect of Fusion Compiler isn't that big a deal since you're able to use your EX special even when it doesn't cost energy to use. And that alone is one of the major reasons why Grace can use her own signature, but other characters may not use it as easily. That being said, if you do end up performing things like dash cancels or are more likely to use some of her EX specials and then quickly cancel it to then activate another cast of her EX special, the actual value from this W engine skyrockets immensely. Now, before we go too off the deep end, calculations for this W engine do show it to be fairly similar to things like Weeping Gemini, Rainforest Gourmet, and ultimately is beaten out by something like an Electro Lip Gloss, but it is still something worth considering, especially if you're at a loss right now for which W engine to put on your main anomaly character and your Burnice as your second anomaly character. Now, the third tip I have for Burnice players of any skill level is when you should be using her ultimate. Now, this is a huge point of contention, especially if you're someone that plays someone like Jane, or if you're someone that plays one of the compositions that has an attack character that actually has an impactful ultimate. There are a lot of things to love about Burnice's ultimate, so let's just list them off quickly. Number 1, it has an insane damage multiplier. Number 2, it gives you 50 heat, which, as I've heard calculated across the board, is roughly 30 to roughly 35 energy worth of value. And best of all, it allows you to easily swap back to someone like Jane or another character, whoever you end up pairing with her. This alone is already pretty insane just because no other character allows you to perform an ultimate while another character swaps onto field, and you also get additional value for your total resources. But this tip may not actually end up being nearly as impactful simply because at some undisclosed point in the future, we aren't entirely sure yet, it's been announced that ultimates may receive modifications or changes so that everyone can use them, but we'll actually have to see how this ends up affecting things, since it's very likely that fights and agents will have to have their ultimates affected or manipulated so that this can actually make sense. For clarity, if you were to just allow every character on screen right now to use their ultimate, and in the current state of ZenlessZoneZero right now, you would basically one-shot everything, nothing would ever be a challenge, and you would triple S with your eyes closed, which, I don't know, maybe to some of you guys isn't that big a problem, but for those of you that believe that ZenlessZoneZero or Hoyo is trying to challenge us in some cases, which I think they're trying to do with characters like Pulchra and some of the shadow enemies that we have in Shiyu defense, I don't think this will end up being the case. So even if we end up getting to use Burnice's ultimate alongside Jane's ultimate in the future, I do still think that they'll tone down some of the ultimate strength anyways. However, going back to the main point, Burnice's ultimate is definitely worth doing in almost every single scenario, regardless if that's with Jane, regardless if that's with Soldier, regardless even if that's with someone like Grace. Now, on the topic of teams, let's talk about Burnice's team order, because this is the fourth and one of the most important tips that I have for you. Now, we just mentioned that Burnice likes to use her ultimate, and this makes a lot of sense because, well, what isn't there to love about a character that does a load of damage and lets you swap to another ally? However, as you swap to another ally, you will of course see the quick assist prompt, which allows you to swap to the next character ahead of you. And believe it or not, a lot of people don't realize that this means you actually have to swap the way that you order your team. Now, of course, I get it. If you're using something like Jane and Burnice, it would sound pretty obvious, or maybe it's even known to you at this point, that you should just have Burnice followed by Jane and then your support on the third. But the scenario that you have to be a bit more careful with, specifically for Burnice in her team order, is when you don't just have one specific main carry and when you have multiple. Case in point, if you're using someone like Soldier and Lucy and even Burnice together in a team, in the team composition that people have been using Crit Burnice in, this is a bit more subjective and kind of depends on what you find to be a bit more easy to do. Now, for me personally, of course, I appreciate the attack increase on a character like Soldier. However, you could argue that if you're building someone like Lucy with a lot of damage, and if rather you're just using Soldier on occasion and you're spending more time on field with specifically Lucy instead, it would kind of make sense for you to immediately get back to someone like Lucy and start auto attacking and getting into her basic attack loop faster, as opposed to swapping onto Soldier, who may or may not even have energy at the end of Burnice's ultimate. All in all, of course, it makes sense for you to run a team composition in the order of Burnice, the main DPS, and then the support, but keep in mind that that isn't the only team setup that exists in the game, and therefore it's very important for you to assess and kind of observe what team composition you have beforehand before just running into battle with any combination or any specific sequencing of your agents. Now, the fifth and final thing I want to talk about is Burnice, her flamethrowers, and of course the Crit Burnice build. Now, if you've been looking around YouTube, on Twitter, or Reddit, you may have seen some clips of Burnice doing insane amounts of damage with her flamethrowers and players not even using her afterburn effect since they can kill so quickly. However, what I'm here to tell you today is that a lot of these videos actually have Burnice at M6 or have her flamethrowers do way more damage than you'd expect. Now, in case you didn't try or weren't super sold on Crit Burnice, I do want to make clear that in normal Anomaly Burnice's build, her flamethrower damage is okay, but not nearly as insane as what I've been seeing on certain sites or from certain players who will show Burnice's flamethrowers literally one-shotting bosses or clearing out mobs super quickly. Now, again, this isn't to say that Burnice's flamethrowers don't do a lot of damage, but regardless if you're using Anomaly Burnice or if you're using Crit Burnice, the majority of the damage does not come from the flamethrower itself. It comes from the anomaly that follows after it, or the afterburn effect in the case of Mono Fire Crit Burnice. Now, to be clear, this isn't to say that the flamethrowers don't do any damage. Of course they do. There's a lot of spread to these attacks, and whenever you're trying to clear out enemies, it does make a lot of sense for you to use them to clear out smaller mobs or to clear out the initial waves before fighting a boss, but this isn't a replacement for actual damage when you're trying to beat up enemies. And using her flamethrower can also take time as opposed to, well, using any other character like a Jane to apply her own anomaly, or even setting up for another character who can then apply disorder. At the end of the day though, guys, these were just the tips that I found a lot of people not super sure about or not familiar with, and I've received a lot of questions about some topics involving some of the tips I just described today, so I decided to, well, share them with you, and hopefully you learned something or gained something from this knowledge. However, as always, guys, thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. Thanks for the support. Thanks for the love on all the content. If you enjoyed today's content though, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe. Make sure to check out, well, of course, all the other content that I've been making on my channel. And if you're interested in talking, make sure to join the Discord, or as always, you can always DM me with any questions you have. I will see you all in the next one though. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.